What is the scariest story you know that is true? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. In the 1930s near my hometown, a man eliminated his wife, his MIL, and his 3 stepchildren, dismembered their bodies, and hid them in the root cellar. My great-uncle and his father, my great-grandpa, were out hunting when their dog ran off barking. Uncle followed the dog and found a burlap bag. He opened it and found the head of one of the children. When he told us the story, he said he looked up, and the man was standing right in front of him, another burlap bag in his hands. His dad arrived, scared the guy away, and they reported the head to the local cops, who found the rest of the victims and arrested the killer, who was hanged a couple months later. My uncle only told us the story once, but after he died, we found all the newspaper clippings about the takedown in a trunk under his bed. I think it must have haunted him his entire life, especially since one of the kids was his age. It's a bit of local history I grew up hearing about, but didn't realize my great-uncle was the one who found the bodies until I was a teenager, because he simply never talked about it, except that one time. Story 2. Back in the 90s, a couple kids went missing. About 4 or 5 days later, my dad was fishing one night, thought he heard a gator, got his big Q-beam spotlight and pointed it toward the noise. It was a bloated dead body bobbing up and down in the water, eyes open and facing my dad. Turns out the kids had driven into the water by mistake, probably had been drinking. They found the other body a few hours later after my dad called it in. My dad was so traumatized that he never went night fishing again, and honestly didn't fish much at all after that. Answer: oh shoot, it's the same with my granddad. Back in the 60s, Chinese girls, usually those that are no longer virgins, would commit tragic end after their boyfriends left them by tying a heavy rock to their ankles and threw it overboard into a local river so that they sunk with it and drowned. My granddad on my dad's side, that worked early in the morning as a fisherman, saw what he thought was a peculiar coconut in the water with long hair growing out of it. He used his paddle to scoop it up, only to come face to face with a severely rotten head. Turned out the body has decayed at the bottom of the river, and the rotten head separated from her neck and floated to the surface. Story 3. A lady in my city tortured her older kids, a 13-year-old and 9-year-old, to passing and stuffed them into her deep freezer for 2 years. For those 2 years, her younger kids had to walk by that freezer, knowing their siblings were at the bottom of it. When she was caught, she said she had no regrets and that her children were demons, all over a delusion that the older kids were intimacy abusing the younger ones. Story 4. There was this guy who kept noticing little things around his apartment felt off, but one night he set up a hidden camera just to prove to himself he wasn't going crazy. When he checked the footage the next day, he saw this woman, an actual stranger, crawling out of a crawl space in his ceiling in the middle of the night. She'd been living up there for months, sneaking down when he was asleep or at work to eat and use his stuff. Answer: I just read a story on Reddit recently about a couple in Spain who were wondering why there was a wash basin full of soapy water in their kitchen sink, thinking one of them was sleepwalking. They asked Redditors, and one guy says someone must have been using it to wash themselves. They looked and they found a mattress in the attic, I think. But the trespasser was never found. Story 5. This might make me seem like a weirdo, but fudge it. So in my mid-20s, I started at a new company with a lovely boss lady. She was awesome, and soon feelings developed between the two of us. We started dating, obviously on the down low. She was early 40s, so a pretty good age gap. We dated for about 3 years, and I won't bore you with the details, but things did not work out. I did love her a lot, though, and often think she might have been the one, if not for the age difference. I don't know. It might be a rose-colored glasses kind of thing. Anyways, a couple years later, working at a different place, a small family business, not mine, that I, funnily enough, got with a stunning reference from my ex-lady friend. The business knew my ex because one of their relatives had dated her in high school. Small fudge world. One Saturday night, sitting on my couch feeling sad and lonely, and get the great idea to go through my old phone that is kept in a bag in my closet with all the other old tech. I know we all have these that are filled with iPods, iPhones, Blackberries, and 1,000 cables we're too afraid to throw out. So I plug this phone in to charge and start going through the messages. I stumble across the text chain between me and my ex. I start to reminisce. And sure enough, I find a pic of her in her bra and think, well, that will do for the night. I know, pathetic. Monday morning arrives and I head into work. The office lady comes up to me and was like, hey, did you hear about Jessica? The fake name giving my ex. And I was like, how the fudge did she know I was creeping? So I responded dumbly with Jessica from my old job, who I used to date, as if she didn't know who we were talking about. Haha. And she was like, yeah, Jessica passed away in her sleep on the weekend. The police found her on a wellness call after she didn't show up for work. I was stunned. I must have been looking at our old text convo, either hours before she was going to die, or possibly as she lay dead in her bed. I couldn't help myself and told this to the office lady. She told me shivers just ran up her spine. I have no idea why I chose that night after 2 years to go through my old phone and fixate on my ex. It was just something kind of calling me. Answer: similar. I had a good friend that lived many states away, and as we both had school-age kids, we didn't speak often, and the time between check-ins started to grow. I dreamt of him and sent a quick check-in email, but never heard back. Then I saw his obituary that his wife had posted. He'd eliminate himself the night I had dreamt of him. I wonder if I had reached out sooner if it would have made a difference. Story 6. Sunshine Skyway Bridge Disaster in 1980. Imagine riding along a bridge when it's foggy out, and then driving over a ledge to your passing in the waters below because a freighter crashed into and took out a giant portion of the bridge. Answer: yikes. Similar accident happened in Sweden in 1980 in the middle of the night in winter. A truck managed to stop just before the edge and was trying to flash his headlights for cars on the other side, but they kept going over. The boat that caused the accident also tried shooting emergency flares, causing one truck to stop briefly but continuing and going into the water. Story 7. In my early 20s, my wife and I had a goal of climbing all of the 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. We would typically hike up a decent portion of the peak the night before, set up a tent, and camp out and summit the next day. We were climbing Crestone Needle in August 2014 and set up camp before the tree line ended. We were in a remote wooded area near a creek that was raging pretty good at the time. No other campers around, no hikers seen going up or down, super quiet and peaceful. We cooked dinner over the fire and went to bed early. I woke up around 1 p.m. with the hair standing up on the back of my neck. The only thing I could hear was the creek roaring and the wind blowing. I remember feeling really uneasy, which was unusual because we camped out a lot and were very used to being out in the wilderness. I decided to get up and exit the tent. Immediately upon stepping out of the tent, I saw the outline of a man about 50 yards from our campsite. He was just standing still, staring down at our camp. I yelled up at him, but didn't get a response. I poked my head into the tent to wake my wife up, and when I looked back for the man, he was gone. My wife and I talked about it and agreed that it was probably an early hiker who was starting their summit push early. Both of us felt uneasy, and neither of us were able to go back to sleep. I laid in the tent for about another 45 minutes and now wide awake. I decided to get back out of the tent to have a look around. I stepped out of the tent and walked around still feeling a little uneasy. Didn't see anything and still couldn't hear shoot. Started going back towards my tent, and when I turned to my left, I saw the guy again. This time he was very close, maybe 20 or so from our tent behind some brush. I yelled at him again and started running his direction. He took off, and I lost sight of him. I got my wife out of the tent, we got all of our stuff packed up, and we left. The 2AR walk back to the car in the pitch black was honestly the most terrifying part of it all. Answer: Crestone. Not surprising. That place is beautiful, but absolute cult and crazy person central. That's where the cult of Mother God had their idiocy. There is a really good podcast called Up and Vanished about a disappearance, likely takedown there, and tons of historic news articles about incidents in the region. I go hiking there periodically, but will not go unarmed. Story 8. This happened 3 months ago, but a friend of mine bought a small house in a housing complex at the start of the year. She often heard her neighbor and his girlfriend arguing loudly, as did the other homes around them. One afternoon, she comes home from work to police in an ambulance in her cul-de-sac. She comes to find out that this neighbor had taken down his girlfriend. She tells the police she still heard him yelling 2 days prior. However, when the investigator came to officially interview her, he told her that the girlfriend had advanced decomposition to the extent that they couldn't get fingerprints from her. Keep in mind this was in wintertime, which means he had been yelling at a corpse for a while. Scary part is the police still didn't arrest him, and he lived in the house until the girlfriend's brother evicted him, since the home was in her name. Answer: my neighbor's son is somewhat unhinged. One time I called the police because he was yelling at his girlfriend. They came into my yard and listened for a while, and somehow were able to find out that his girlfriend was at her house, not his. But all three of us heard 2 voices. Turns out he was imitating her voice, her side of the argument, the whole time. Story 9. There was this super eerie case in Lebanon involving a family of weirdos from a village called Farshima. Neighbors had been whispering about them for years due to their reclusiveness and antisocial behavior, but it wasn't until last summer that the authorities broke into their property and found 5 dead bodies in different states of decay in a hidden locked room under the house. Turns out the eldest son had been quietly stashing his own deceased siblings and father down there since the 1980s, claiming it was a family ritual and that he was just fulfilling their wish to be buried at home. While some died of natural causes, one brother, George Al-Fada, had been eliminated by another sibling, Khalil, during the Lebanese Civil War. Khalil took his own life in 2000, and a baby girl named Marie died in infancy for reasons that remain unknown, but it's rumored that one of the brothers had eliminated her out of jealousy. The eldest brother, Cristo Al-Fada, was living there with his senile 90-year-old mother. He was arrested, the mother was sent to an elderly care facility, and the bodies were finally given a proper burial. Such a creepy family, and the story was absolute nightmare fuel when it broke out. Story 10, the Nutty Putty Cave tragedy still gives me chills. A guy named John Jones got stuck exploring a narrow section of the cave in Utah in 2009. He was trapped head first, wedged so tightly that even rescue teams couldn't free him. He stayed like that for over 24 hours before he died, still talking to rescuers and praying in his final hours. They eventually sealed the cave permanently with his body inside. Knowing he was alive, conscious, and waiting for passing in total darkness is one of the scariest real stories I've ever read. Story 11. My great aunt woke up to her dog growling in the middle of the night. When she checked a window, a man in a ski mask was standing there and said, "Party time." She screamed she had a gun, and her dog went crazy barking until he ran off. She bought a gun after that. I can't even think about what would have happened to her if she didn't have her dog to warn her. Story 12. You can wake up blind. Happened to me in 22. In short, I have a super rare disease called Azure. Best they can guess, my body's immune system attacked my eye's immune system. Yes, they're separate, and ate chunks of my retinas. It's still doing so, but not quite as vigorously as it did before I started seeing the results, which manifested as a sudden inability to see through my contacts or glasses. Anyways, I can still see a little bit out of half of one eye at a strength of 11 or 0, but I woke up like that after 38 years of seeing 2010 with contacts or glasses was definitely hard to adjust to. Oh, and since autoimmune loves to travel in packs, I now also have RA in psoriatic arthritis, and my diabetes is getting worse. Yay, I'm the queen of autoimmune. Answer, my family has a history of Hashimoto's. My dad, me. And we didn't know that autoimmune stuff happens as a sort of BOGO deal until my dad's immune system suddenly started attacking his lungs. One day he went from having what we thought was COVID, and a day later he was in a medically induced coma and hooked up to ECMO. Thankfully, once we pointed out he already had an autoimmune disorder, they figured out it was a type of vasculitis, and he's stable now, but has to get infusions a few times a year. I'm very much not excited to find out what my BOGO deal gets me. Story 13. My cousin died unexpectedly in 2016 of what we assume was an extremely aggressive cancer. He left behind his wife and 2 boys, aged 2 and a newborn. A couple years later, the wife entered a relationship with another guy, who by all accounts was a stand-up character for both her and the boys. In 2021, the wife died of what everyone assumed was COVID. The boyfriend had her cremated extremely quickly and offered to take full custody of her sons. It soon came out that he had been abusing the boys, physically and intimacy. He skipped town. The boys were adopted by my cousin's sister, who brought them to see a child psychologist. When the therapist built enough rapport to ask the boys about the day their mother died, the boys proceeded to play act one person, smothering another with a pillow. Meanwhile, the boyfriend was charged with the violation of a minor relative, but the trial was delayed on a technicality and then dropped when the victim recanted. Last I heard, late 2021, he's an assistant pastor at church in New Hampshire. Edit, misspellings, added info. Story 14. I'm assuming you mean ones we're kinda connected to in some way, so I'll go with one of those. I worked for a year or two at a chemical type company a long time ago, 90s I think, and they had a big announcement. The company wasn't doing quite as well as they'd hoped financially. One of the guys in the crowd was muttering how they'd better not be talking about layoffs, and of course, that's exactly what they did. So the guy who was muttering apparently went straight out to the parking lot where his truck was and got his rifle out and was immediately swarmed by police because they had always seen him as a bit of a concern, so they prepared for exactly that. Big thank you to whomever thought ahead that far, rather than just assuming it would be okay. This was before mass shootings were quite as popular as today. Story 15. About 13 years ago, my sister came home from college for the summer. One day, she got a frantic phone call from one of her roommates. Turns out, these girls were not worried in the slightest about locking the doors to the house. This roommate was taking a shower, got out of the shower, and was drying off when she heard a noise coming from the vent directly above her. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight and pointed it up at the vent, and all she managed to see was an eyeball staring at her before she justifiably flipped out and sprinted out of the house in nothing but a towel. She called 911 and the police went into the attic and arrested a homeless man who had literally just been walking around checking for unlocked doors, allegedly. Then it all started to make sense why food was going missing, and the girls assumed someone was lying about taking food. I have zero clue how it was possible that this creature was looking through a vent, but it happened. Answer: listen to a story similar to this on YouTube recently. Difference was, in this one, it's an apartment with 5 rooms, one of which was unoccupied after the girl living there passed away. Well, after noticing weird shoot happening, one girl started trying to figure out what was going on. The other girls kind of brushed it off. Well, eventually, one girl was home alone and heard a noise. She left her room and ran into the homeless dude living in the dead girl's room, and he subsequently beat the absolute shoot out of her. Fudge terrifying. Story 16. The case of Clive Waring. He's a musician who contracted a virus that destroyed the part of his brain that forms new memories. He has anterograde amnesia, meaning his memory only lasts for about 730 seconds. He is constantly waking up for the first time every single moment of his life. He keeps a diary, and it's filled with entries minutes apart, each one saying something like 10:45 a.m. I am now awake, with all the previous entries crossed out because he has no memory of writing them. It's the true story of a man trapped in a never-ending moment, and the thought of that is scarier to me than any ghost story. Story 17. My mother went to a recruitment meeting with Heaven's Gate founders Du and Tai. She wanted to join, but they wouldn't take children. Years later, when they transitioned, she dug out the pamphlet they were giving out and told me the story. Story 18. I live not far from Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. We had a serial killer who would pick up prostitutes and bring them back to his farm to party. Then he would eliminate them and feed them to his pigs. He would also sell the pork to friends' neighbors. Answer: he eliminated one of my aunties. We didn't know what happened to her till they busted his farm. We don't know for sure that she was eliminated by Robert Picton, but her quantum card, treaty card, and ID, and possibly a purse were found on his property. So that's the most closure we will ever get, I expect. I mean, how would it have gotten there otherwise? Auntie lived rough, had her issues, residential school trauma. Intimacy work was how she got by, and that fudge went and eliminated her, along with so many others. Story 19. During college, I lived in an apartment with a community pool. There were a bunch of us having beers at the pool one night over summer term, and one of my friends ran to jump in the pool, but changed his mind at the last second. His feet slipped out from under him on the wet concrete and he went down. He broke his neck in the edge of the pool, never walked again, and had extremely limited upper body function. I watched someone's life be ruined, and it was terrifying. Listen to the lifeguard and walk. Story 20. Back in 2006, when my older sister was moving to a new city for work, my parents and I helped apartment hunt for her. My sister found a really nice apartment in a nice locality, which was absolutely perfect on paper. The residents were all working women. The landlady seemed super nice to my sister, and the location and rent were ideal. The only thing left to do was for my parents to meet the landlady and finalize the documents. However, after my mom met the landlady for the first time, she told us that she had a weird feeling about her and asked us to keep apartment hunting. So that's what we did. Anyway, fast forward a year or so, and we find out from the local newspaper that the landlady was into black magic and she had allegedly taken down some of the residents to use as sacrifices for her rituals. I wish I was lying. Till date, it is one of the most terrifying things I've read. Edit. So this incident happened in Bangalore in the year 2006-2007. I'm assuming the news coverage would have taken place in 2008-2009. I'm 100% sure this happened, but I'm unable to find a news article that talks about it, partially because there was another takedown in a PG in 2024, and I can only find articles pertaining to that incident. I will keep looking for this, but if anyone else comes across this article, I'd like to see it as well. Apologies for not coming up with a source at the moment. Story 21. My mother wanted to sell the old family station wagon back in the mid-1970s. She had a phone call from an interested buyer, but something about him seemed off. She told my dad that she wanted him there when the guy came to look at it, and my dad was the one who went with him when he took it out for a test drive. They ended up selling it to him. Turns out later the guy take down someone and used the station wagon to take the body somewhere. I don't recall if he was a serial killer, but that was a very uncomfortable brush with danger. My mom's intuition might have saved her life. Story 22. Hinter Kaifek. In 1922, a Bavarian family was taken down on their farm after footprints were found leading in from the woods with none leading out. The killer stayed for days feeding the animals and using the stove, then vanished. Story 23. In lived in Arbroath at the time and worked in Brecon. They take down her and dismembered her in a house round from where I used to do my shopping. The police dive teams were diving in Arbroath Harbor for a few days looking for the rest of her after her head washed up on the beach. How awful that something like this would happen in two small Scottish communities. Story 24. The movie Society of the Snow, or La Sociedad de la Nieve. That plane crash really happened, and the survivors had to eat human meat and anything really, even cigarettes, to survive. Story 25. In the 2000s, I worked for a residents organization on a council estate in South London, housing project for U.S. readers. It was poor as you would expect, with high crime but a good community. The estate consisted of 5 high-rise tower blocks, with our office in the basement of one. The other basements were used for storage, and it was part of my job to check them regularly. They were big basements. The blocks were oblongs on their sides rather than slim point blocks. The basements were dark with minimal lighting, dark corners, echoing and creepy. You get the picture. One of the residents of the estate told me they used to use the basements for their own storage. But back in the 80s, a 6-year-old child had gone missing on the estate, and after a frantic search, her body was found in the basement of one of the blocks. She'd been intimacy assaulted and taken down. A homeless man was arrested and convicted. I can't remember if he'd been living down there or not. The man who told me was an elderly, long-time resident who was well respected. He said he could still remember the screams of her mother. I worked there for years, and it would be mentioned every now and again by various older residents who always talked about the mother's screams. Obviously, this made checking that particular basement a bit creepy, to say the least. Some staff wouldn't go down there at all. I had to leave hurriedly a few times after getting the fear, but never saw anything supernatural. I searched the internet at various points looking for evidence of the story, but could never find anything. Then a few years ago, suddenly there it was. Probably the result of a newspaper putting their archives online. It was exactly how I'd been told, and pretty horrifying. Story 26. The scariest story I know would be the Villisca Axe takedown. Happened in Villisca, Iowa in 1912. A husband, wife, their 4 children and 2 neighbor children came home from a church service, had cookies and milk, and went to bed. That night they were all taken down in their beds with an axe. The next morning their neighbor noted that it was pretty late and nobody had done the chores. All the doors were locked, so she got a hold of the husband's brother to check on the family, that when they were discovered. What made it so heinous were a lot of people trampled through the house, destroying any evidence. They never found out who did it. Story 27. In 1991, my brother's best friend, B, witnessed the takedown of his family. B lived on an acreage with his grandparents, his cousin, and his uncle. It was during summer break, and the uncle shot the grandparents and cousin, put the bodies on a brush pile to burn them, and then took B into town for ice cream. B was only 7 years old. We never saw him again, and it really tore my brother up. We lived in a very rural, boring area, so it was a huge shock. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Until 2022, when a woman I'd gone to school with was taken down by her husband in an attempt to get her life insurance and also free himself up for the other secret relationship he had going. He tried to stage it as an accident, that she had been crushed by a round hay bale that fell off the tractor forks, but the investigators noted she had blunt force trauma to the head, inconsistent with his story. Even more fudge up is that they had a house fire a year prior that he claims started when he was deep frying pierogies at 3 a.m., but most people now suspect was his first attempt to take down her. Story 28, a different kind of horror story, but I had a post-traumatic manic episode about a year ago, and it is terrifying how quickly and severely your brain can turn on you. The episode manifested when I left my abusive ex-wife, was violation, and lost my job within 12 months of each other. For several months, my brain was in a constant state of either dissociation, sheer panic, suicidality, or an irresistible need to engage in risk-taking behaviors, mostly related to substance use. The adult beverage was the worst part of it. I'd drink so I could stop feeling my rapist, and it would work, at first. But then my brain would tell me drinking more would make me stop thinking about it too. So I'd drink more, and then I'd think about it more. And then my brain would tell me that more would actually make it go away, and so forth in the cycle. I isolated myself from almost everyone I loved, and it wasn't even intentional. I just couldn't pick up my phone, and getting notifications from it literally made me panic. I went through all of my savings in a matter of months and almost all of it went to adult beverage, plant substance, and cocaine. I knew logically during this time that I was absolutely destroying my life. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. And my brain was just sick enough to remind me that it didn't matter how recklessly I was behaving, because ultimately, I wasn't going to survive this. I very nearly became homeless and had to sell an expensive piece of artwork I'd inherited to rent a U-Haul and move back in with my dad in my home state. Removing myself from an environment where I knew how to get the things that were destroying me and having family look out for me is what finally pulled me out of that state. But a huge chunk of my memory during that time is just gone. To add one more piece to this before I leave it, I have 3 cats. One is very elderly and obsessed with me. One was abandoned by my ex-wife and clearly affected by it. She was supposed to keep her, but asked a friend to babysit her while she went on vacation and never returned for her. And my third one developed such serious separation anxiety when I left my wife that if I left for even a night, she'd overgroom until she was missing fur and had sores on her body. I was driving to do an odd job for someone and considered driving off the cliffside in front of me. I thought of my cats and how terrified and sad and confused they'd be if I never came home. And the moment I realized I couldn't eliminate myself because of it was the single most horrific experience I'd ever had. Not that I wanted to eliminate myself, but that I couldn't. Again, not a traditional scary story, but I can think of few things more horrifying. Answer: oh my God, I'm so sorry that you went through so much and so impressed by your strength in sharing your story and in carrying on. People really don't want to think about their brains turning on them. Makes sense. But no one is immune from it. It's really scary to be dissociating and know that you're dissociating, but not able to stop it. I wish you and your kitties nothing but the best. Story 29. My grandparents lived in Monterey Park, Los Angeles when my mom was a kid. They lived there during the takedown sprees committed by Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. My grandpa was a trucker who often found himself coming home late at night. He would typically crack himself a beer and watch TV at night before going to sleep. The living room was right in front of the front door. My grandpa says that late at night, he noticed the door jiggling like someone was trying to break in. He and my family were well aware of his spree at the time, and my grandpa didn't hesitate to grab his mystery Musca tool from the closet, a 12G shotgun, and proceeded to chamber around. Everyone knows the distinct sound of a shotgun being loaded. My grandpa locked and loaded one time and said the jiggling suddenly stopped, and after a while he was able to go bed. I don't remember if he reported it to the police, but I think he did. It's crazy to think I may not exist had it not been for my grandpa. A few days later, the Night Stalker went after someone in Monterey Park. I know it could have been anyone trying to break in, but I truly think he was targeting my family and thought there were no men home, as there are only daughters and mom, no sons. Story 30. I heard this directly from this person. I used to work for a forensic psychologist, and one of our clients was named Richard Farley. Richard Farley was a stalker back in the 80s, and when the girl he was stalking finally got a restraining order, he walked into her job and shot 11 people, eliminate 7 of them. She survived with 3 gunshot wounds. The scariest part was listening to him tell the story. His case was being reviewed because he was on passing row, and they were trying to get it committed to a life sentence, which incidentally, he did not want. They were talking to him because he had been diagnosed with adult autism, and they reopened his case to see if that had any bearing on his decision-making. Just listening to him recount the events with not one shred of remorse or sadness made my blood run cold. When my boss finally asked him how the victims' families felt because he eliminated them, and his answer was plain his day, he just said, why would they miss them? They're just not here anymore. I believe they made a movie about him as well, called The Stalking of Laura Black. Incidentally, though, his case was the reason that there are stalking laws on the books. A stalker used to have to actually cross a physical plane for it to count, and once they have that case, they realized that people needed more protection, because even without crossing a physical plane, he absolutely made this woman's life a living hell. I got to visit him at San Quentin with my boss. As soon as we walked in, she ordered the guards to take his shackles and handcuffs off and then asked them to leave the room because she said he wouldn't be upfront and honest if they were there. So basically, my boss and I were alone with a serial killer in a room in a jail. Story 31. I had a dude pretend to be like a priest or something. When he asked me for a ride and pretended to need money for his kid's surgery, I later found out he stabbed somebody. He never gave me the gas money he promised either. Go figure, I guess it's not the scariest store, but it was pretty crazy to me at the time. Story 32. A student in the dorm next to mine had his throat slit in the night. Some students got to see the victim gag for air. After the killer was jailed, he and his father filed around 200 appeals. or tried to at least, for his innocence, even though he was literally caught red-handed. Story 33. My grandparents lived in the desert on 4 acres. A year or two after they died, natural causes within several months of each other, their neighbor's property was raided. They found a secret underground bunker where he'd, I believe, molest boys. This guy was a lawyer and helped my parents with the estate. I've searched for news about it, but this was like 1990. I was a teenager and my parents told me about it. Story 34. Someone I know has met Jeffrey Dahmer IRL. He thankfully wasn't his type, but this person is so nice, and to think they were near a serial killer makes me so sad. Answer. Someone I know met British serial killer Dennis Nilsen not long before he was caught. He and some friends had gone up to London from West Wales to watch a football match and ended up in one of the pubs that Nilsen frequented looking for victims. Nilsen started chatting to him with a view to inviting him to the flat he lived in. Luckily, the person decided not to go back to Nilsen's flat and stayed with his friend group. When the news broke, he recognized Nilsen instantly. Story 35. Co-worker was almost a victim of takedown tragic end. Her husband was holding a gun to her head, telling her he was eliminate her for her sake as the world is so terrible. Standoff with police lasted long enough for her to get a chance to shove him away. He shot himself in the head before she even got far enough away to avoid the splatter. She had to quit her job after due to the PTSD and the fact that she was a nurse in a mental health ward. She also needed a police guard around her house for the next month due to writers, red news jockeys, kept trying to break in to get the story. After that, she changed her name in order to avoid talking about it. The only reason she told me is because she had to take a call at the call center we work in, not even remotely related to healthcare, where the woman on the other line was tragic end and couldn't get through to the tragic end hotline. I was just trying to calm her down enough to drive home. Story 36. Ray Bleach. I'm not even bothering reading any of the stories right now, but I'm sure some of you would want a palate cleanser. Story 37. The CIA helped bring substances into the U.S., turned a blind eye while they spread through communities, and then the government turned around and criminalized the very people using them. Imagine your government fueling an epidemic for profit and power, then punishing the victims. That's one of the biggest betrayals of public trust I can think of. Story 38. This isn't an answer to your question, but for anyone who wants to read some similar, identical posts, this is a collection of Reddit posts compiled a few years ago by a user who saved us all the trouble of wading through the daily "What's your scariest?" posts. Story 39. CW takedown. Dating violence. My friend was taken down by her ex-boyfriend. She did not like he talked to her and how he treated her, so she broke up with him. Jerk couldn't take no for an answer. He thought she was cheating on him with their mutual friend, so he cyberbullied her. And then he bought a gun. My friend went to the police. There was nothing to be done because they didn't see it happen, because they didn't take dating violence seriously. My friend goes to a home where friends are gathering. He rammed his vehicle into hers, entered the home, shot someone in the leg, shoots the mutual friend to passing, shoots and eliminate my friend. Her parents had to go to court for a restraining order because he kept sending them letters about how much he loved their daughter. I can't think of anything scarier than this. My friend was eliminated because a man couldn't handle being told no. He felt so entitled to her time, her body, and her life. My friend's favorite band was Incubus. Her favorite movie was Moulin Rouge. She was part of a magnet program for the arts, specifically drama. At District's drama competition of sorts, we had a break for lunch. There were only 3 of us who had licenses and a car. Each of those cars was loaded up with as many teenagers as could fit. I had someone sitting on my lap. We all went for Chinese food together. Story 40. In 2008, I was working at an ad agency downtown, Madison, WI. There were 2 takedown downtown that summer, Brittany Zimmerman and Kelly Nolan. They were both brutal, and it shook everyone up badly. I worked long hours, and a couple of times I was the last one out of the building. It made the walk to my car really scary those nights. Story 41. Brother's girlfriend's brother was involved in gangland shoot in Ireland. She said one time that people came to her house after her brother owed lots of money. Walked in, put a gun in the table to make an entrances. No guns in Ireland. She is rattled ever since. As she should. Careful out there, lads. Story 42. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the system that includes the Gulf Stream, is reaching its breaking point and could collapse sometime between 2004, with the average estimate around 2050. If it did happen, the impacts would be massive. Europe would cool dramatically, sea levels along the U.S. East Coast could jump by a meter, tropical rainfall belts would shift, causing Amazon droughts and monsoon disruption, and the whole climate system would get more unstable. It would also be essentially irreversible on human timescales. Story 43. I was in the DC area when the DC shooter was on his rampage. It turned out the guy was trying to terrorize his ex-wife. Story 44. I'm 33 now, but when I was a teenager, my father was into some substances and, as one would assume, had some pretty terrible people in his life. This one dude named Mike, I'm going to use his real name, since he doesn't deserve the respect of anonymity, would come over every now and then to get dope, but he would always be super off-putting. Huge dude, like 6'4" and 380 to 400 pounds. Ragged and rough, loose cannon type. The type that should not be around your kids. So one day my father comes home from work and seems a little off, which made my grandma ask what was wrong. He explained that Mike was in jail for eliminate someone. Come to find out the next day that Mike actually befriended this couple in a rural town about an hour away and would go to their house for side work when he needed money. They were fixtures in the community, and I think they owned a feed store if I'm not mistaken. Well, he ended up going there in the middle of the night and got a hold of one of their guns, robbed them of their debit cards and extorted the pins, shot them both in the head with their own gun, and set the house on fire as an attempt to cover up the scene. He walked to a store nearby and used the ATM. Multiple people witnessed him walking on the highway between the burning house and the store. They caught him shortly after, and he was sentenced to 128 years in prison after being convicted on 2 counts of first-degree takedown and a couple of other charges. Story 45. My dad was a counselor for emotionally handicapped kids. One kid saw his dad eliminate his mom and roll her up in a hide-a-bed couch. The dad's side is basically an organized crime family with several in government and law enforcement, so he got off for it. The passing was ruled as accidental because the mattress must have snapped shut on her. Everyone knows it was him. Nobody wants to have the mafia go after you or your family, so they basically let it go, and this guy walks around free as hell. Kid was obviously fudge up for life after that. Story 46. This happened to me. While in college, I was working alone at a retail store in a shopping mall. I had closed shop for the day, and I was the only person in the store. I took some stuff to the stock back room, which also had a small card table with 4 chairs around it for meal breaks. I returned to the front of the store to continue closing up. I was out there for like 10 minutes, then went to the back room to get my coat. When I stepped into the back room, all 4 of the chairs were facing the door in a perfectly straight line. Several feet from where they should be at the table, these fudge chairs had moved and changed directions silently, with no one else but me there. I noped the fudge out, called mall security. They searched the store and found it empty. They said I probably moved the chairs and forgot. I never worked there alone again. Story 47. I think the Holocaust does it for me. The industrialized takedown of several million innocent men, women, and children perpetrated by a government out of pure hatred. I struggle to think of anything scarier than that. Answer. I always had trouble believing how so many people could just sit by and watch it happen, or even actively participate in it. And then looking at the current state of our world, I absolutely can believe it. There are a lot of people in this country who would happily take part in an industrialized slaughter of immigrants, trans people, or others who fall into another category. Story 48. I work for a parks department as part of the maintenance team. It's not in the nicest district as substances and gangs have taken a toll on the community. When I first started working this job, I would have to clean the bathrooms at our main park as the new guy. We show up to the parks around 6 a.m. and it's still pretty dark out. Can make for a creepy scene sometimes. After a couple of months on the job, this shirtless, prison-jacked black dude started showing up every morning, like 5 minutes after I started cleaning the bathrooms, and always asked if the bathroom was open yet. I always replied that they would be done once I finished cleaning them. He was always pretty cool about it, but he gave me weird vibes. He would just stand by the door and do what looked like Tai Chi while I finished up. Made it awkward, especially if I had to go in and out of the bathroom to grab something and walk right in front of him. His behavior got weirder and weirder until one morning he showed up completely naked and proceeded to do his morning Tai Chi. Chased him off from the park and told him not to come back, and I didn't see him for well over a month. He went on to take down an old lady, chop up her body, and live in her house for weeks right across the street from another one of our parks. He was discovered because neighbors started complaining about the smell of decaying corpse. I climbed the ladder and am no longer the guy that cleans the bathroom. Story 49. 1. Just now that someone wrote that, the Snow Society, the Dyatlov Pass incident, impacts me the most too. A woman who took revenge for the takedown of her son. It turns out that a guy who was driving tipsy ran over a minor. His mother saw everything, she demanded and was on trial, but since there are incompetent authorities, the man was declared innocent. She wanted revenge, so she began to follow his every move. She already knew what he was doing. Where and how? She decided that one day when this man was tipsy, she was going to provoke him, and she did it. One day when the man was tipsy, she seduced him. She convinced him to go to her house, and the guy entered her house. And taking advantage of the man's drunken state, she gagged him and tied him like a dog. Every day she hit him on the head. She gave him soup to eat. The days passed, and in one of those she told him that what he was eating was his daughter. When the man found out he no longer wanted to eat and vomited and begged for her passing, she told him that if he wanted to die, he had to finish all of his daughter's soup, and so he did. After he finished that, she eliminated him with a hammer. Story 50. A dear friend of mine is becoming more deaf over time, and it only started happening a few years ago. She's in her mid-30s and has 2 kids, not even in their teens. She will likely be completely deaf before or by the time they become adults. She had to go a GoFundMe to afford hearing aids because insurance doesn't consider them necessary, and they are thousands of dollars. Answer: the same thing is happening to me. My hearing loss is listed as profound and is getting worse every day. A lot of the loss is unfortunately in the range of human voices, but it's gradually encompassing more ranges. Hearing aids are not covered, so my only option would be a cochlear implant, which means I wouldn't hear the true voices of my child or husband anymore. Story 51. There are more vacant houses in the U.S. than there are homeless people. Empty homes everywhere, and people still sleep on the streets. Story 52. Many years ago, on a road trip from LA to San Francisco, husband and I stopped at a rest stop. We slept there for a couple of hours, and then when the sun rose, I went to use the restroom. Stepping inside, I noticed papers were taped to the mirror. I had to use the toilet really bad, so I just stepped into the stall. Washing my hands after, I looked up and read the paper on the mirror before me. It said, "If you want a good time, call XXX." Then it describes what he was capable of doing and how in his extraordinary God-given attributes that would be used in the process. Then at the bottom of the paper it said, "But if you don't want to call, I will be right outside the door, by the big tree waiting for you." My heart just went cold and I froze. I don't want to move, and I am looking around to see if he is in the restroom, feeling stupid for not reading that paper before or checking the stalls. I just stood there and waited for what seemed an eternity for my husband to notice that I was gone along and come get me. It wasn't that long, but it felt that way. I ran out, grabbed my husband, and went to the car. I looked back, and sure enough, there was a guy by the tree just outside the door, exactly the way he described himself, the exterior part anyway. And he looked at me, then quickly looked away. This was way before cell phones, so there was no way for me to call police. Never again have I gone into a public bathroom and not checked. Story 53. A person I know got hemolytic uremic syndrome, kidney failure, after he got food poisoning from undercooked burgers. He was a healthy man in his 20s and had to spend several weeks in the ICU. He made a full recovery, but apparently it can be deadly, all because of a burger. Story 54. My husband was in the Army 16 years. We moved a lot, obviously, and one of the places we ended up was in the middle of the desert with only one road to and from it. 30-minute drive to the nearest anything off base. One day, I was making this drive and I saw something on fire on the shoulder of the road. Not blocking it, but right there. Weird shoot happens in the desert, so I was like, hey, and kept going. Later, I found out that one of the soldiers that had just gotten back from deployment found his wife in bed with another soldier. He tied this man to a chair, drove him halfway down the road off base, and lit him on fire. So I had driven by and seen the burning body of this man. When I saw him, it looked like a pile of charred wood. Now, no one knew where his wife went, but the base rumor mill said that he drove her into the desert and dropped her down a well. The wife part IDK if it's true, but the burning man is. Story 55. I was friends at college with Ian Beggs the Gay Ripper. Used to go drinking with him and parties back at his house. Story 56. More creepy and sad than scary. But when I was 5, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house in a cul-de-sac. Attached to our kitchen was my neighbor's garage. Relevant. When I got older, I came to find out that my neighbor's husband had been having an affair with the lady across the street. The only reason it came to light was because she got pregnant, and given she was a single mom, the other neighbors speculated. Anyway, the truth came out, and my neighbor made it known she'd be leaving him. While she was out one evening, he hung himself in their garage. She continued to live in that house for probably another 7-8 years roughly. Their adult daughter visited pretty often too. And for almost 10 years, I watched the girl across the street grow up and sometimes played with her when she got older, not knowing she was my immediate neighbor's husband's affair baby. It was also pretty eerie to think I was hanging out mere feet from where a guy eliminated himself. It happened just 5 weeks before we moved in. Story 57. This one is from my parents. It was a summer night 2023. During a thunderstorm, they stayed in a one-room apartment on the first floor next to the road that led into the complex. After falling asleep at 9 at night, my mother woke up a couple of hours later to see her closet light on. She just assumed it was my father doing whatever and tried to go back to sleep. The noise continued to come from the closet, and eventually she decided to ask, "What the heck are you doing in there?" Then to her shock, my dad raised up from his slumber next to her in their bed, started frantically shouting at the intruder that he had a pistol and to get out. After no reply, he opened the closet door all the way to find a massive man who stood 6'4" with long, soaked black hair covering his entire face with just a towel wrapped around his body. After this finding, this man more frantic shouting happened, and he opened the sliding door and walked out into the thunderstorm. Cops were called and the arrest was made. It was a homeless man creeping to steal some dry clothes. He was released 6 months later. After my parents seen he was released, they decided to move to another town. The reason I find this story so creepy, though, it doesn't involve dead bodies. Thank God. It's how common it is to experience home intrusions and could happen to anyone at any time. And the sense of privacy that just disappears, that you never do know if a homeless, mentally ill boogeyman may appear in your closet. Story 58. Someone in my family is a tourist tour leader. A blonde girl of his group disappeared in Jerusalem. She was violation and eliminate. Story 59. Unit 731, some of the less publicized aspects of the Holocaust. The guy that would kidnap people, torture them, then substances them up so bad they were incoherent and no one believed them because they couldn't describe what happened. Edit, correct unit number. Not some made-up shoot because apparently my brain blocks that. Story 60. A week ago, my family and I were at a military vehicle event where we were camping. A man called Gary we've known for a few years came to talk to us one evening, and after a few bottles, shared a story he had heard which he wasn't meant to. He was with his friend when his dad came home with one of his friends. They had been drinking, and while Gary and his friend were hiding behind a sofa, he began to describe something that had happened while he was fighting in the Second World War. His small group were going around a town when some of them began to drop. In 2 minutes, 4 of his fellow servicemen had been shot through their heads. Frantically ducking while trying to find whoever was picking them off, they came to a churchyard. In a freshly dug-up grave, they found a female sniper. They tussled and restrained her, but fueled purely by the rage of losing 4 friends, one of the soldiers removed his bayonet and slashed her throat until completely decapitated. They ditched the body and her head in the grave where she found her vantage point and covered it up with dirt that she had seemingly dug from the grave. Around the middle of the 3rd paragraph, another man who had been camping near us, Johnny, took a seat. He had been Gary's friend who had heard the story with him and agreed to every detail. As a skeptic, I fully believe that churchyard is haunted now. Story 61. When I was 9, my grandma died of cancer. While she was on hospice at home, my grandpa was having an affair with another woman, probably months before she actually passed. Once she passed, he expected a large life insurance policy. But at some point, before my grandma got really sick, her twin sister took her to get the beneficiaries changed to their 3 children. At some point, his girlfriend decided she didn't want anything to do with him and left him. Shortly after, he found out that he wasn't a beneficiary on the life insurance, and he snapped. According to my grandma's twin sister, the girlfriend was in the process of getting a restraining order against him when he went to her house. Her 3 children, 2 nephews, and mom were home, and he went on a takedown spree. He eliminated the mom, her 2 youngest children, and her nephews. Her oldest son was able to get away and run to a neighbor's house to call the police. The article I read when I was older said the responding officers described it as one of the most horrific scenes they'd walked in on. My grandpa left and went on the run. I remember seeing pictures flashing of my family on the news. My grandma's twin sister, my family, and my aunt and uncle's family all had police stationed outside for a week while a nationwide manhunt for my grandpa ensued. No one knew where he'd go or what he'd do. Eventually, he went to my grandma's grave and proceeded to call his 3 children. I answered the phone when he called my mom. She talked to him for a few minutes and was crying on the floor when she hung up. She never told me what he said. He called my uncle last and spoke to him while he died. At my grandma's grave, a passerby called the police and SWAT came to capture him. While he was on the phone with my uncle, SWAT surrounding him, he slit his own throat on top of my grandma's grave. He told my uncle that he'd buried a few things of his at her grave, and my uncle eventually went back to find his wallet and a knife. I was really young when this all happened, but my family still doesn't talk about it. I see his picture in my mom's house, and it makes me shudder every time thinking how this man could just snap and take away so many lives. including children, similar ages to his own grandchildren. It's incredibly scary to think that some people are just a breakup or disappointment away from destroying so many lives. Story 62. I know this is true because it happened to me. I was sent to a wilderness program in Utah when I was a teenager. If you don't know what that is, picture holes, but with hiking instead of digging, and bulls instead of yellow-spotted lizards. We were hiking on Mount Tabby. While we hiked, our guides told us that the mountain was home to an old entity, one with a name that, once spoken, would summon it. My group mates were incredulous, and a few started yelling its name over and over again. The guides told them to stop, and while we kept hiking towards that night's camp, one of them told us a story. Some years ago, another group this guide had staffed was hiking in the same place. They kept saying the being's name out loud. The next morning, one of the guides checked their camera. On it were photos of the group sleeping, students and guides, all in the same shot. The camera had been buried halfway down the guide's pack, and none of the layers looked disturbed. Now, this isn't too scary on its own. I was skeptical considering the guides had an incentive to keep us orderly. Ghost stories are a good way to keep teens from sneaking off at night. To this day, I don't know if that camera story was true, but after what happened to me, I'm inclined to believe it was at least based on a kernel of truth. To understand why, I have to tell you about the structure of where we ate. We walked until we hit a fork where two trails joined into the path we would continue down. Nestled between the tines was a grassy hill. This hill had a depression all around it, a moat, if you'll permit. The moat had a few bushes down in its nadir, but otherwise there were a solid couple thousand square feet of clear land all around us. We ate lunch on top of the hill and walked past the bushes on the way up. As lunch was wrapping up, I realized I had to pee, so I told a guide and got permission to backtrack to the bushes for privacy. I pulled my pants down and squatted. Then I noticed something glistening. A dead deer lay in the bush just to my side, eyes catching the light. It was fully intact except for its hooves, which had been removed. Bones were visible in the stump's viscera. There was no blood pooling around it save some drops from the ankles. No markings in the dirt. No obvious other wounds, though I'll freely admit I'm a city boy with no hunting experience. I got dressed and ran back up to tell a guide. One came down and looked and confirmed what I saw. The other stayed behind to stop everyone from rushing over to look. We had been at the lunch site for maybe 30-45 minutes. There were no strange tracks on the trails around us, nor blood to follow. Nobody heard screaming or a gunshot or any remarkable noise at all. We didn't see anyone else on the trail that day or for most of that excursion. At the end of the day, I don't know why the deer might have been there. I don't know what happened to it. Again, I'm not a hunter, so there may be something that I'm missing. What I do know is that it spooked the hell out of some of us. Nothing major happened afterwards, but for the rest of the week, everyone was a little more quiet. One of the scariest things that have happened to me. Up there only with the troubled teen industry itself. ETA. Because people keep asking, I squatted to pee because I don't quite yet have the proper equipment for the other option. Story 63. I live in Metro Detroit, and there was a woman in Pontiac who abandoned her 3 kids in a house for years. It was covered in feces and trash when the kids were finally discovered. Story 64. Back in '96, the town I lived in had a store, and half of it was a secondhand clothing store. The other half was a sports collectibles place. For months leading up to April 16th, staff in the clothing store swears they could smell gas. It was so bad they called the fire department and the gas company multiple times. Nobody could find a leak. Gas company dug up the lines and did testing on them, and the fire department used detectors to try and find something. On April 16th, 1996, it is believed the furnace kicked on and ignited the gas. The explosion and fire eliminate, 6 people and injured, I believe, 20. During the investigation, no fault was found in the pipe and no definitive cause was found. Story 65. Before my wedding, my father-in-law, to-be, warned me about stag night shenanigans. When he was a lad, he and a bunch of mates were on a stag night, and having got a bit pissed, they handcuffed the stag to a street lamp and went for a drive laughing. When they got back, they found that a tipsy driver had crashed into the lamppost and eliminated the stag. Story 66. That poor Japanese schoolgirl brutally tortured and taken down by those POS Yakuza guys. Don't remember her name, but her story broke me. Story 67. Woke up to screaming at the front door. Dad was desperately pushing it closed, but someone on the other side was pushing it in. They gave up after a while. Cops came, said 2 convicts, in for life, had escaped. Found out later another family wasn't so lucky that night. Story 68. A British family's neighbor kept insisting that the kids were yelling insults and heckling him when they were outside playing in the garden. Only the father immediately knows it's bullshit because the kids are too afraid of the neighbor to even go outside. When the father confronts the neighbor for his lies, the neighbor threatens him and expressly threatens the lives of the kids, the oldest no older than 6, making it clear that he'll teach those kids some manners. Naturally, the father calls the police. Here's where it gets worse. The neighbor's name was Harry Street, and when the police started investigating the threats, a junior officer noted that despite being close to his 70s, the incident took place in 2013, none of Harry's public records start until the mid-90s. Junior officer immediately realizes that Street is living not only under an assumed name, but an assumed name given to him by the government. This means he's an ex-con whose crimes were so notable that the police had to give him a fake name after his release for his own safety. But there are no clues to his former identity on his police records. Around the mid-90s is when they switch from paper records to computer databases, and sadly, it's not uncommon for some paper records to have not been transferred over to the databases due to human record. Luckily, they still kept the original paper records just in case such a situation ever arose. She goes to the paper storage facility, tracks down Street's real criminal record, and calls the family in the middle of the night to warn them to get the fudge out of their house immediately, while also getting armed response to kick his door in, where they find an arsenal of handmade guns, ammo, and bombs. Harry Street was once known as Barry Williams, and as a result of psychotic and paranoid delusions caused by being an undiagnosed schizophrenic, Williams went on a spree provoked by his delusions in the 1970s. He was institutionalized for 20 years until he was determined to recognize the error of his ways and the need to self-manage his condition, but emigrated to Spain right after his release without letting the police know about his past when he emigrated back to the UK a decade later. Williams had stopped taking his antipsychotic meds years ago, and his delusions were convincing him to go on another mass shooting. If not for that threat or the junior officer realizing his cover identity was fake, he'd have taken down his neighbors, just like when he started his first rampage. Story 69. I worked with an elderly woman who had a deformed hand. Found out she walked in on her husband with a shotgun in his face. She reached for it as he pulled the trigger. Rumor was her hand was stuck inside his head. Story 70. This happened in the 1990s at Marine Off-Base Housing in Albany, Georgia. Neighbors were woken up by their doorbell ringing in the middle of the night. The husband went to the door, but no one was there. He figured it was kids ding-dong ditching. Hours later, they were woken up by sirens blaring in front of their house. The couple went outside, and that's when they noticed their doorbell was melted. Later, they found out what had happened. A husband had covered his wife in something flammable and set her on fire. She ran to the neighbor's house to get help, but kept running after ringing the bell and collapsed and died in their backyard. Story 71. An ex-girlfriend of mine bumped into the town local young troublemakers, and they invited her back to this eccentric elderly guy's house that some of the young kids used to take advantage of and hang around his house. When she went there with her cousin, they asked the reprobates where the old guy was. They opened a cupboard and proudly showed them the old man's battered body. Story 72. A woman that I work with was recently divorced and was trying to meet people on POF or some similar site. She's a completely normal, regular, non-weirdo. Anyway, she agreed to meet some guy for coffee. When she got to the agreed-upon coffee shop, the guy was waiting and was very insistent that she should get in his truck. She refused, and he joined her inside. He immediately got very handsy, and she ended the date. As she was leaving, the guy again tried to get her to get in his truck so that he could show her the massive political sign he had in his yard. When she declined, he invited her to go. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care. What makes you instantly lose respect for someone? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. When someone gets irrationally angry at someone for something that the accused had very little control over. For example, a customer getting really angry at a member of staff because of something the company they work for did. Shouting at them isn't going to change anything. It's not their fault and you look like a jerk. Answer. Also, people who judge way too harshly. I was on the bus today and another car got way too close and the driver dodged and bumped into a parked car. We were going very slowly on a crowded road. He goes out to check damages and comes back in, apologizes, and drives on. Then this meanie on the phone said loudly enough so he could easily hear it, "This fudge driver is so shoot at driving a bus." I really fudge wanted to yell at that cunt. Even if it was his fault, which it was not, it's still just one bloody mistake. Not something that gives you the right to be a meanie and call him shoot at his job. Story 2. When their complaints against a politician aren't merit-based. It's one thing to say, "I don't like Obama because 90 of his economic recovery went to the top 1. It's another to say, "I don't like Obama because he's a Muslim that dislike Israel." Story 3. When someone tries to further their political moral cause by putting down another cause. I can't believe you care about the homeless cat population when there are homeless people too. I dislike that crap. It's my biggest pet peeve. You've instantly lost my respect, and I'm not going to listen to your opinion. Just let your cause stand on its own 2 feet and don't put others' passions down to make your point. Story 4. Honey, God put you on this earth to make babies, and you won't be a real woman or know real love until you put that womb to work. Edit. To clarify, this doesn't make me lose respect because it's a child-free parent issue. I don't care who does or doesn't have babies. It's just the creepiness and bizarre nature of each part of that statement. I am not an incubator with legs. I am a real woman, and yes, I do know real love. Answer: yes, I'm 21 and female, and know for a fact that I will never want kids. The older I get, the more sure I am of this. I had a pediatrics rotation for nursing school and absolutely dreaded being around any kid from the age of 3-15. I dislike talking to them and pretending to have that motherly, fun-loving side. Also, I think pregnancy is gross. No offense to anyone, just my personal opinion. And childbirth is the most horrible-looking thing I've ever witnessed, both cesarean and natural. People always laugh when I tell them this, and they go, "Oh, you'll change your mind in a few years." It frustrates me to no end. Some people don't want kids. That's how it is. Story 5. A few years ago, there was this guy I was pretty good friends with. We started working at the same company at the same time, and since we were both from other countries, we were drawn to each other, even though we were completely different people. Anyways, after we had been friends for a few months, he started telling me about witchcraft and how he's in contact with the moon. Personally, I don't believe in things like that, but I decided to respect him. It didn't make me lose respect for him. Since we both worked in IT, we both had a lot of time on our hands. I decided to spend all my free work time on Reddit while he started to read up on conspiracy theories. He kept telling me about how corrupt the world is and how we're being controlled. Usually I like to listen to people, and I'm pretty understanding of how people see things, so that's what I did. But then one day we were both on the bus, and he seemed like he wanted to share a big secret with me. I'm telling you, man, the moon landing was fake. I've never lost respect for anyone quicker than that. He later on told me about chemtrails and a lot of other stuff, but we ended up drifting apart. This story probably wasn't that good, but I feel like I've written too much to delete this, like I usually end up doing. Story 6. When they blatantly disregard something that is a big deal for you, but seems tiny for them. For example, I suffer from bad nyctophobia, fear of the dark for those who don't know fancy lingo, and my boyfriend completely supports me. He'll know why I'll freeze up in a dark hallway randomly, or ask him to go ahead even if it's just to walk 5 steps to a light switch. He'll even cuddle me extra tight at night if I start getting too on edge.